All right, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever this finds you. Today I'm going to be reviewing Michael Shellenberger's 2020 book, Apocalypse Never: Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. Michael Shellenberger is the founder of the group Environmental Progress and a former advisor to President Barack Obama on environmental issues. His book, Apocalypse Never, raises concerns about the alarmism and fear-mongering of current-day climate activism, its effects on society, and the effectiveness of mainstream policy proposals to combat climate change. Throughout the book, Shellenberger uses examples of what he considers environmental alarmism that have crept into the mainstream of our culture. One of his first examples is the predictions made by activists within the Extinction Rebellion movement and organization. In October of 2019, a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion claimed on national television that billions of people would die due to the current state of global warming, leading to mass protests in London. And also claimed that praediction was based on an IPCC report, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that report not only doesn't make that claim, but in fact directly refutes it. The book also touches on the mainstream concern of deforestation. We've all heard stories about the disappearing Amazon rainforest due to slash-and-burn farming. However, it is not common knowledge that for the last 35 years, the global tree population has increased, not decreased. Global forest land has increased by roughly the size of the state of Texas and Alaska combined in that time. Shellenberger points out that this is due to urbanization and economic development that's so often assumed to be associated with negative environmental impacts. This is something that I learned throughout Apocalypse Never. The more developed an economy is in any given society, that's predictive of how environmentally friendly that society can be. For example, Shellenberger observes that Brazil, with a large population of extremely poor, is castigated for farming expansion in the Amazon by a country, Germany, which is a wealthy country who no longer have the farming needs of Brazil. Important to note, Germany went through their own very similar, in terms of landmass, deforestation process several hundred years ago, and only now that they are rich and prosperous are they concerned with the environmental impacts of deforestation. Shellenberger also points out that despite massive media coverage of forest fires, these forest fires are actually decreasing. There is a 25% decrease in the area burned by forest fires between 1998 and 2015. Another area the book touches on is humanity's use of plastics. While most of us feel a sense of pride choosing the inconvenience of paper bags at the grocery store to limit our use of plastic, I know I do, we don't realize that paper bags would actually need to be used 43 times before they would have a smaller impact on the environment in comparison to the plastic bags. Yet some governments have even gone as far as to ban the use of plastic bags, despite the science around protecting our environment being directly opposed to this type of regulation. A common theme throughout this book is how the average person and the climate activists tend to do more harm with their responses to the problem of climate change and contribute less to the solutions that might alleviate the actual issue. And that is really where I feel Shellenberger's work elevates from interesting to useful. Shellenberger uses sort of a mocking tone to describe how wrong conventional wisdom on environmental issues can be, which is indeed interesting and thought-provoking, but that attitude, I think, could have rendered his work unimpactful long-term. But as a form of climate activist himself, Shellenberger has several policy prescriptions that could mitigate the effect of man-made climate change. Perhaps Shellenberger's best example of this is found in his chapter Saving Nature is Bomb, where he discusses the use of nuclear energy as a replacement to fossil fuels. Shellenberger goes into detail about the over-exaggerating by mainstream news and other media as to the danger of nuclear use. He even breaks down the statistics around disease and death during the Chernobyl disaster and compares that to the amount of disease and death caused by the burning of fossil fuels. I watched the show Chernobyl, which is actually brought up in the book. And I will say that the drama of that show really gives you a sense that that was a huge disaster that is unparalleled. But in kind of seeing how it actually compares to fossil fuels, I thought was really interesting and brought something a little more tangible to the book. He shows that nuclear is significantly less dangerous and destructive than our current burning of fossil fuels. Shellenberger also highlights some of the key figures in anti-nuclear propaganda, including former presidential candidate Ralph Nader and others dating back to the 1970s, and how Hollywood helped to peddle this propaganda, making nuclear a taboo policy for any political leader to recommend. Shellenberger looks in depth at the number of lives that could have been saved had we invested in nuclear power rather than halting it almost completely in the United States. He does this by comparing the numbers of deaths associated with the mining and burning of coal compared to the number of deaths around nuclear energy plants, and the difference is staggering. Shellenberger concludes his book by asking why. Why is it that folks who profess to be concerned with environmental issues willfully disregard the science and engage in behaviors and hold beliefs that actually harm the environment? This had been my question through most of the book. I couldn't understand why reasonable solutions are so often rejected by those professing to care about saving the planet and the humans that inhabit it. I couldn't understand why those who profess to follow and believe in science seem so uninterested in its conclusions. Ending with his chapter, False Gods for Lost Souls, is the perfect way to close this work by answering the question many readers will have. In this chapter, the book dives into why Shellenberger believes so many have fallen into the common misunderstandings of climate activism: religion. Shellenberger proposes that many climate activists, but more accurately climate alarmists, have created a sort of religious movement in climate activism, where stories about climate change don't actually have that much to do with the science of climate change. This is roughly how Shellenberger puts it. In interviews outside of this book, Shellenberger describes how he has now been labeled a science denier and a climate change skeptic by climate organizations and large news organizations, reputable news organizations. He says this is despite having been an architect of the legislation that was the precursor to the Green New Deal, which is seen by many as the most aggressive legislation proposed to combat climate change that we've ever seen. This is also despite Shellenberger being a fierce critic of oil companies and their attempts to conceal data on what Shellenberger believes to be man-made climate change, as well as receiving support from numerous members of the IPCC, some specifically for this book, and as well as other well-known climate experts. Shellenberger suggests this is because, by climate alarmists, he is seen as a heretic of their religion, as opposed to an educated critic of particular policy decisions. Shellenberger cites an anthropologist by the name of Ernest Becker, whose research suggests that apocalyptic environmentalism is an outlet for people suffering with mental anguish, especially amongst the young. Becker writes that this is because addressing our personal lives is painful, and for that reason, we often look for external demons to conquer. And I find this is very true for many political, social, and religious movements that engage in radical ideology and or behavior. Shellenberger suggests, therefore, so many climate alarmists rely on intuition about nature rather than rigorous scientific research. Shellenberger refers to this as the appeal to nature fallacy. The appeal to nature fallacy holds that natural things, like wood fuel, are better for people than artificial things, like nuclear plants. From Shellenberger's book, we now know that this doesn't hold up with the science, and wood burning, as opposed to nuclear, is more damaging to the humans that use it and the environment. Michael Shellenberger set out, I believe, to pull back the modern-day climate alarmism from the brink and back into the realm of solution-oriented scientific inquiry. While critics acknowledge his work is well-researched, I believe this book is designed to be as much accessible as it is informative. Perhaps Shellenberger understands the need for democratic decisions to be made on climate change that will require reasoned and logical debate amongst the masses, and not just the experts and the political elite. After reading Apocalypse Never, I contend that Shellenberger has succeeded in his mission, and that this book is the start of a healthy and informative dialogue that could even be compelling to individuals who may have been skeptical to the whole thing, to the inflammatory and often false claims of climate alarmists. I would recommend this book for any reader looking for nuanced information and to be more persuasive when discussing environmental issues. So thank you so much for watching this review.